Mabuhay! Maligayang pagdating sa The Life Podcast.
Hello, as you know, my name is CJ Alton, and today we're going to have a great discussion. Something that's very important. We're going to be talking about physical and sexual abuse. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about these different abuses in the Asian community. And there's two reasons why I want to focus specifically on the Asian community. One being that, according to this research that I found, it seems like Asian women are a bit more hesitant in comparison to other women about coming forth and speaking about different abuses, so physical abuse, sexual abuse. According to the data, looks like they're a bit more hesitant. So, I'm not like an Asian advocate or anything like that, but nonetheless, I wanted to go ahead and share this information. So that's number one. Number two was the idea that, just in my opinion, I feel like mainstream media likes to pinpoint and specifically pick on Black males when it comes to physical and sexual abuse. And I feel like it's a long-standing stereotype ever since even the 20th century. When 1930s newspapers came out and said Black men are assaulting white women. Um, I'm sure in some instances that was the case, but white women, or sorry, white men, do assault as well. And so, as we'll see, Asian men are no different. And so, really, the idea here of this short clip is really just to show that from white to Black and everything in between, all men are guilty of this. And so, I hope that this kind of sheds light to kind of ease off the perception and the propaganda against Black men, and just kind of skew the viewpoints to all men, right? So with that said, let's get this started. So here we have a research from the Asian Pacific Institute on gender-based violence. So obviously they focus on specifically the Asian community and the violence that ensues within this group. So obviously the title, Statistics on Violence Against API Women, Asian Pacific Island Women. So as we go into discussing domestic violence, right, you could see 21 to 55% of Asian women in the US report experiencing intimate physical and or sexual violence during their lifetime based on a compilation of disaggregated samples of Asian ethnicities in local communities. So, depending on the ethnicity, and we'll obviously go through this graph right here in a second, but as you can see, anywhere from 1 in 4 to almost 1 in 2 women Asian women have experienced this. Moving on, 18% of Asian or Pacific Islander women reported experiencing rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime in a national survey, as compared to 48% of American Indians or Alaska Native women, 45% of Black women, 34% of Hispanic women, and 37% of white women. So obviously you can see here that, these percentages of other ethnic groups are higher. But as I said at the very beginning of the video, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's occurring more, but rather being reported more. So for example, you cannot get these numbers unless they're being reported. If they're not being reported, they'll look like that, 18%, right? Or even lower. So as we go into partner abuse prevalence rates by ethnicity, let me draw in here so you guys can see, right? We have Vietnamese, 22.4%, Filipino, 21.8%, Indian, 19.5%, and that's Indian as in Asia, just to clarify that. Korean, 19.5%, Japanese, 9.7%, and Chinese, 9.7%. Now, specifically Chinese, that rate is obviously very low. And it pretty much goes into, what we'll discuss later in the article, where women, Chinese women specifically, don't come forth about the abuse that occurs, along with other ethnicities. I don't want to just pick on Chinese, but you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. So here we are, sexual violence, right? So of API women, 23% experienced some form of contact sexual violence. 10% experienced complete or attempted rape, and 21% had non-contact unwanted sexual experience during their lifetime. 56% of Filipinas and 64% of Indian and Pakistani women had experienced sexual violence by an intimate in a study of 143 domestic violence survivors. So an intimate basically means like your partner, your boyfriend, husband, that kind of jazz, right? So as you can see, the percentages again are higher in the Filipina and the Indian and Pakistani women community, where they're a bit more upfront and up forth about coming out about their abuse. So here we have a graph that talks about, the proportion that agree with the statement. So this is basically a statement that's being said, and these are the women, the percentage of women that agree with that statement. So first statement, a husband is entitled to have sex with his wife whenever he wants it. 10% Chinese, 10% agreed. Korean, 3% agreed. Cambodian, 28% agreed. And Vietnamese, 23% agreed. And then the second statement, some wives seem to ask for beatings from their husbands. So 23% of Chinese agreed with that statement. Only 6% of Korean agreed with that statement. 25% of Cambodian and 57% of Vietnamese. So it seems, just based off these numbers, the Vietnamese women, it could be a sense of maybe perhaps a low self-esteem that is going on within that community, where they have higher percentages of believing that the man is, the top of the totem pole, as compared to Korean women. Their percentages are a lot lower. And so we'll see something a bit more interesting in regards to Korean women and the dynamics of abuse within their community. So children's exposure to family violence, 70% of Cambodians, 61% of Chinese, 80% of Koreans, 79% of South Asians, and 72% of Vietnamese men and women reported being hit regularly as children. These are very high percentages. Obviously more than half, some are more than even 2/3. So it seems to be culture within this Asian community to hit children based off these numbers. 28% of Cambodians, 18% of Chinese, 30% of Koreans, 8% of South Asians, and 27% of Vietnamese witnessed their fathers regularly hit their mothers. So as you can see, the Cambodians, again, have a higher percentage. 30% of Koreans have a higher percentage, or 30% of Koreans, which is a higher percentage, and again, 27% of Vietnamese, it's a higher percentage. So the masculine role in these specific ethnicities of Asians seems to be overriding the feminine value, if that makes sense. So trafficking, right? Of the 3,116 trafficking survivors with specified ethnicities who reached out to Polaris operated hotlines in 2016, 23% were Asian. So basically, the 3,116 trafficking survivors within the United States, 23% of those were Asian. That's a very interesting rate because, if I'm not mistaken, throughout the United States, Asians only make up 5%. So the fact that they're pretty much quadrupling and almost 5 times the rate of their population are trafficked survivors is quite an interesting number. Just based off some research that I've done earlier in my studies, I recognized that, the first set of Chinese women that came in the 1870s and, the 1880s, when the Chinese Exclusion Act was being drawn up, I actually found out that about 75% and even 80% of the first set of Chinese women that came to America were actually sex trafficked, and they were prostitutes. So that's a very high number for it to be 75%. This book was called Policing Sexuality. Jessica something, can't remember her last name, but definitely check out the book. It's definitely factual information. So that kind of lets you know how Asian men feel about, or specifically Chinese men, how they feel about their women, trafficking them off like that. And if you know anything about these massage parlors today, it's not much different. Okay, I won't go in too deep about that. So here we are, attitudes towards violence, right? So of the 607 Asian respondents, the top explanation for why family violence happens were that the husband wants power, domination, and control. 72 responded this way. And that he feels frustrated, has anger, 67 responded this way. Overall, family violence is overwhelmingly perceived as a personal problem of the husband. So it's just personal issues that the Asian male is going through, and they want to maintain domination, power, and control. And of course, men do that through their physicality. 22% of Cambodians, 18% of Chinese, 29% of Korean, 5% of South Asian, and 9% of Vietnamese men and women said that a woman who is being abused should not tell anyone about the abuse. Look at these numbers. You have 22% of Cambodians, right? You have, let's skip here, 29% of Korean, right? And even to the point, really 18% Chinese, that's a fairly high number. But it goes to my point with this first graph here, where you see the rates of assaults that are, or abuse that is occurring. Again, it's not that it's not happening in the Chinese community. It's not that it's not happening in the Korean community. They're just not reporting. So again, if they're not reporting, then you're going to have a lower number. So when you see South Asians and Indian women a bit more adamant, and they're going to speak up, this is why you have these high numbers. It's not necessarily that, Filipino women get hurt more or abused more. It's just a simple fact that they're more willing to come out about their abuse. So to my last point, right, proportion that agree with the statement, right? A wife should move out of the house if her husband hits her. 80% of Chinese women agreed, 10% of Korean women agreed, 22% of Cambodian women agreed, and 21% of Vietnamese women agreed. So as you see, Cambodian women and Vietnamese women, they're more likely to want to leave. They feel, obviously, right? South Asians, they feel more, I don't want to say the word brave, but they feel more compelled to, stand up for themselves. As compared to Korean, that's a low number, right? So a wife should move out of the house if her husband hits her. That's a low number. So they're Koreans, as it seems, they're just more tolerable. They tolerate it more. I'm going to show why. A husband should be arrested if he hits his wife, right? Chinese women, 14%. Korean women, the highest percentage, 34%. Cambodian, 33%. And Vietnamese, 18%. So here on one hand, you have Korean women saying, hey, we should not move out. You should tolerate it. If your husband hits you, you need to figure out what you're doing wrong. That kind of rhetoric, right? But then on the flip side, these same respondents are saying that a husband should be arrested if he hits his wife. And they agreed. They had the highest percentage of agreeing with that statement. So you can tell, specifically with Koreans, it's a tolerated behavior. And then as you can see, Chinese women, they don't want their husbands to be arrested whatsoever. So it's a more tolerable thing in that community as well. So like I said, it's just a short presentation. I just wanted to, bring light to the situation, understand that, there are victims that are a bit hesitant about reporting these assaults. I did not post any hotlines or anything like that, but I definitely recommend, standing up for yourself and trying to better your situation in any way you can. And hopefully, this brings light that, all men are guilty of physically and sexually abusing women. It's not just Black men, not just white men. It's everything in between. So I just really wanted to put light on that. Hopefully you learned at least one thing. And if you need the help, please go out and get the help. And with that, have a good day and peace be with you.